it. Come on. Can we all see that?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Cool. All right. So tendinopathy is probably the most common thing that I see in my physio practice. So today, basically, we're going to go over is what is a tendon? Let's go with the basics. And then what is a tendinopathy? What are the common trends? And then about training loading. What can you do to identify and prevent it? And then always there's the safety police brief. So what is a tendon? Let's go back to the basics. So a tendon attaches a muscle to a bone all over our body. It's a really solid piece of collagen fiber that makes sure that muscle stays on the bone. They are stiffer, and that's the whole point. There's not much ability to contract, whereas a muscle has a lot more movement to it. But that's what makes it so strong. So especially things like the Achilles, it's almost like having a spring. So what you want to do is like coil it up, and that's what gives you that explosive power. There are 3 areas to the tendon. So these are really big words, but basically it's saying the muscular tendinous is where the muscle and the tendon meet. The osteotendinous is where the bone and the tendon meets. And then the mid part of the tendon is literally that mid portion. So depending on what's going on is to which section, and that sometimes changes our management of the injury. So when I ask kind of where is the pain, I always say point to me, and that will guide me on kind of the nature of the injury, kind of what we need to do as management, potentially if there's been any kind of tear. So especially when we look at the more muscular end, that's where we also make sure we look at the muscle itself. Especially at hands and feet. So if everyone kind of looks at your wrist, so you've got loads of tendons, all the tendons from your hands go through your wrist. You've almost got like a watch strap of tissue that goes around the edge, and that's what keeps it nice and collected, so that when you kind of flex your hand, they're not all popping out like a bowstring. So there's always risks that's where tendons get annoyed by this tissue that wraps around. I've talked about at the bottom that you can get bursas. They're a fancy name for a blister pack. So where our Achilles meets kind of our heel, obviously there is an area where the tendon could rub on the bone. So it's got a blister pack to make sure it doesn't. And we have them all over our body, and that's literally their job. Okay, so first of all, tendon attaches muscle to bone. Simple. So this gets a bit sciencey, and if people are really interested in science, I can send these papers over. A tendinopathy is when there's any kind of pain or dysfunction. So a tendon can handle so much. Every tendon in your body has a capacity. So if you can see me, I talk with my hands a lot with this bit. So if you're pain-free right now, so again, all over our body, that means your tendons are working within their capacity, so what they can handle. If you overdo it for whatever reason, that's where tendons get angry. So 1st of January, everyone's a marathon runner. So shock horror, knee pain, Achilles pain, because their tendons are suddenly being asked for more than they can handle. Then if you stop, generally it stops. So on my little diagram now, you will see the normal tendon. So excessive load, we go on to this next bit, which is called reactive, meaning you've made it unhappy. It tells you that you stop, it stops. Cool. And we can go back to a normal tendon. And that's why this cycle comes in. If we keep annoying it, so I know that, I'm going to every week, I'm not a runner, every week I'm going to add on a kilometre a week. So I've actually almost 50%, like, week 1 to week 2 is 50% more, week 3 is 30% more, and they're still quite big jumps that my body probably can't handle it. And that's where we get this tendon goes into this more disrepair phase, meaning the pain comes on quicker, it takes longer to go away. Now with these different phases, so this is getting really sciencey, but if I were to get an ultrasound, your tendons should look like dry spaghetti. So they should be really nice, solid, straight lines. That's like collagen fibers, and that's what you'd see on an ultrasound. If your tendon gets angry, it gets an enzyme that goes in that reminds it it's angry, and it draws in water. So that's why if you've ever had an angry tendon like your Achilles, that's what most people have experienced at some point, it looks thickened because it's full of water. So that's why we don't call it a tendinitis anymore, because there's no itis to it, there's no inflammation. If I did a blood test, there'll be no inflammatory markers. So that's why it's a tendinopathy instead, because itis means inflammation. So my tendon is angry, so it fills up with water. I leave it alone, water goes away. If water stays on spaghetti too long, what happens? Spaghetti goes a little bit more wiggly woggly. So that's where we go down these phases. The more the water stays in, the more permanent changes that can happen to this tendon. So when we go really down the line, so these are kind of your anything more than 3 months of pain is consistent, you know, even going for the walk to the shops brings on my Achilles, my knee pain. That's where we're going more to these degenerative changes and the more permanent changes that happens to these tendons. And that's where it's more risk of the bigger injuries. So any questions on that sciencey bit? I appreciate I've talked a lot, and I will go make it more relevant to actually sport and what it means to you.
That bit was super interesting, actually.
Sorry?
I said that bit was super interesting, actually. Thank you.
So cool, I like that. As I said, I'll make it more relevant, but that's kind of what a tendinopathy is in its scientific side of it. And I can talk about this all day, but this is the basic. So this is a normal overuse injury. So very few people will just wake up because I did one lift and had pain. So that's more likely muscular. When I say most people tell me, so when I'm in clinic, I always listen for patterns. So most people will say, my pain is here and point. My pain is on my knee and point. If they're going, it's kind of here, unlikely going to be a tendon. But shoulders, most people say, my pain is here. And that's probably where a lot of strength people will resonate with that. They will say, you know, it hurts at the beginning. When I get going, I feel good, but at the end, it really hurts. In the morning, it can feel stiff. These are the common things I'll hear. Most of it is around activity. So I'm okay when I squat, but when I do squat jump, that's when I get my pain. Sorry, was that someone asking a question? So, as I said, tendons always have a tolerance. So when they get stressed, that's when that dysfunction comes about. So these are kind of repairable things if we keep it in this, like before this disrepair, degenerative is where the nastier things can happen. And again, I appreciate when I talk at the minute, when I talk, I put fear factor in. There's always a risk. And my job is always to look at risk in the worst case to stop that happening. So what we want, and this is where Chloe comes in. So on the right, you'll see you've got that optimized load, you adapt, you get stronger, and your tendon remains happy. We do want to stress them, like that's how we get stronger, but we want to do it the right way. So I'll go straight to the nasty stuff now. So when people have ruptures, so sometimes it's sport and it's just unfortunate. In strength sport, we know that probably like your bicep pops, your pec tears, it's a lot more common in performance enhancing drug use when the muscle gets stronger a lot quicker and the tendon can't keep up with it, and that's why we get ruptures. Other areas, so like when I've worked in netball, we get a lot of kind of Achilles ruptures, and that's because we've had these elements of degenerative tendinopathies over time, and then eventually it's the final straw, and that's where they get the rupture. So they're clean athletes, but they get the more overuse tears. So generally, if you ultrasound a rupture, there's always elements of degenerative changes, so your wiggly spaghetti going on. That doesn't mean it's the whole tendon, it can be segments, but obviously that wiggly spaghetti is easier to break through than your more solid spaghetti. Okay, so loading. We're going to talk about sweets soon as well. So loading is what helps us perform. So we need to increase our load to be able to lift more, to be more explosive, to run faster, to reduce that risk of injury, risk. And this is what sport is about. We have to push ourselves to get better. However, if we do too much too soon, we increase that risk. We overtrain, we get fatigued. You get, most of the time, obviously, you feel you can't, you know, if you're overtraining, you try do your normal, you know, 80% deadlift and you can't because you're just so knackered, you're struggling to get motivation, that kind of thing. If we're not loading enough when you do your sport, you're not going to be able to tolerate it. So if I decided I run 5K now and again, and I'm like, I'm gonna do a half marathon, Chloe, my body probably won't do very well. So I'll probably be at risk of injury. I'll be in a lot of pain afterwards, and it'll take me longer to recover. So we need to find a sweet spot. So we don't want to overdo it. We don't want to underdo it. We want to be in this green zone. So this, again, I'm going to go a little bit on science. So it doesn't matter. So this is where 1 week at a time doesn't make much difference. It's this accumulation. So this is the science part. So week 1, you can see week 1 to week 4 is quite a consistent load. So kind of the same sort of thing every week. Week 5, something happened. So I don't know, went on holiday, felt sick, just didn't go to the gym that week. Went back, nah, I'm fine. I'm so rested because I've not done any training. Let's double it. And then you've seen this massive spike. So that green is kind of what we call the acute training load. The red is the chronic training. So kind of that training over time. So over time, you can see that on the right, you've got 0 to 2.5. We don't want, over 4 weeks, we don't want it to go below 0.8 or above 1.3. So this is more the sports science people. But this is where we want to find that sweet spot. Now, Chloe's graph and my graph will look completely different. But at the end of the day, we want to stay between 0.8 and 1.3. Now, there are always crunch points. Life happens. So when I'm working like in elite sport where we can almost dictate hour by hour of their life, it's a little bit different. Most of us are doing sports because it's a hobby, but we still have family, we've got jobs, and we have social life. So, and again, that's absolutely fine. But these are the kind of things we have to factor in. So I went on holiday. So therefore, I'm not going to be in the gym. So yes, I might put some stress on my body because I'm walking about, but I'm not doing my normal training load, or I'm doing less than my normal. So that's where we can dip. But what we don't want to do is dip and then do this massive roller coaster ride up. We want the next week would have to be a little bit of a progressive reload. Again, work stress. So if you go on a work trip, so it's not to say if you don't train at all. So if you end up doing like a hotel room workout, that's still stimulus. It's normally when people do nothing. So when I'm working, say again with netball, I keep going on netball, but 2 weeks, everyone does shutdown. So there's no training, no games for 2 weeks because of Christmas break. But then the week after they come back, they have 3 sessions of training, S&C, and a game at the weekend. So we've gone on a massive spike, almost having done nothing. Now, in the chat, they were asked about hormones. Hormones don't have, I would say, a big factor. So there's loads of research talking about if people are on synthetic hormones, so be it like the contraceptive pill, things like HRT, the risk of men versus women. There's a lot of evidence out there, but it's not very strong. You can tear it apart quite easily. So it was saying that women that are on their natural cycle are at a lower risk of, say, tendon ruptures because there's more pliability, especially through their cycle. Someone that's on a synthetic hormone might be at a bit more risk because things are a bit stiffer because we don't have that hormone that's giving us that elasticity within our like ligaments and tendons. Men are more likely to say like have that muscular tendon risk. But again, as I said, this was done in like elite football. That was where a lot of the studies happened. So a very niche population. So in terms of with hormones, so be it if you are on contraceptive, if you are on HRT, the patterns are still the same in terms of you will know if you overload, your loading might have been different when you're in your 20s to your 50s, but these patterns of when these symptoms come on are exactly the same. How we manage it is exactly the same. Any questions on that? Because I appreciate that was just something that came up in the Facebook group, but any questions before I move on? Nope. Okay, so, it hurts. What can I do? So as I said, most people will have a pain that's kind of come on out of nowhere, or it's not been like, oh, I lifted this and then it hurt. Most of the time it will be like the next morning I woke up and the front of my knee or just below my kneecap hurt, my Achilles, the rope-like structure at the back of my heel, the underneath my heel of my foot. It's just really sore, pinpoint, feels sharp. They're the kind of things I'll hear. It's okay when I rest and do nothing, but as soon as I do something with it, it hurts. So first of all, tell Chloe, tell myself, we're not here to stop you training. And especially with tendons, almost not training is worse for it. So back to my little roller coaster. If it hurts, if you drop down, your tolerance drops down. Obviously, one session is all well and good, but most people say, oh, I stopped training for 2 weeks, then went back to see how it was. What we'd rather do is where can we adapt it? So knee pain, so it hurts at the bottom of the squat. Cool, let's do like a half range squat instead. Let's just make it static and not plyometric. So there are always things Chloe and myself can do to back off a little bit. That might be all it needs to calm it down and then back to normal. We are here to keep you as training as much as possible. The longer, and again with tendons, so tendinopathies, I also say are like having a blister. If you have a blister on your foot, until you take the shoe off, blister's not going away. You can take all the pain relief you want, carry on all you want. You can carry on with the blister, it just hurts like hell, but it's not going to go away until the shoe is off and it stays off. So when we talk about loading, until we reduce that stimulus and leave it reduced, it's not going to start to settle down. That water's not going to leave the spaghetti. So that is where, again, we just sometimes need to make an adaptation, and that's it. I talk about this probably more in adolescence, but it's not normal to be in pain. So it's all right for things to feel tight. It's all right to have that almost like DOMS, but pain is not a normal thing, and it's something that we can have an influence on. So I have like 15-year-old netball players say to me, oh, you know, I've just got the normal knee pain, you know, I'm a netballer now. No, it's not normal. If it hurts, you're going to find a different way to do activity. So like I said, if you have a blister, you still carry on. You're not going to just say, oh, I must lie down now. You're going to carry on walking, but you might change the way you walk because you want to offload it a little bit. So performance wise, you're actually going to reduce, because where it hurts, you're not going to work it as hard as you can. So something else has to take the brunt. And that's where sometimes on later stages, especially legs, one injury will become two because something else has taken extra work. So then that gets angry and we have a bit of a domino effect. So back to, tendons like stimulus. So that's why we want to keep them stimulated. So generally what we'll do is reduce it until you're pain-free, then shimmy it back up again. If it hurts, we go down one level, and that's how we keep that stimulus in. Tendons have a 24-hour reaction. So if you tried, I'm going to try a 3K run. I was fine on the run, no problem. Fine that evening, no problem. The next morning, I was aware of my Achilles again. So that means it didn't tolerate it. So we look at a 24-hour pattern. So especially if you're trying something new, if you're looking at increasing your loading around tendons, that's what you leave in your comments to Chloe, is if you're pain-free 24 hours, great. That means you can handle it. If there are symptoms, that's what we need to know about, and that's how we can adapt it. And that's where, writing notes, if you have a diary on your phone, that's how we can keep track of these things to make sure we're playing smart. With tendons, so like I said, they're getting overloaded for whatever reason, and there's lots of reasons why. So sometimes it can be that the muscle is tight, sometimes it's weak and that's why it's getting tight. Sometimes it's, say with legs, it's actually, if I've got a right leg pain, it might be lefty that's the problem. So if I'm working 60-40%, my painful leg is actually the strong one, and it's lefty that can't do anything, so righty is doing more work. So that's where I'm really big on making sure we look holistically, not just where the pain is, because that might not be the fire, that could just be the smoke. It could be a technical thing, so if you're trying something new and because you're not quite as skilled at it, you might find another way. There's always a different way to skin a cat, but that might be where it's coming about. So for example, when I started doing block press, well, I did whatever I could to get it up in that time frame for the comp. I probably didn't do it well enough. So then I got a shoulder tendinopathy. So then I had a look at technique. changed it up, and obviously that reduced it. We're also looking at like external reasons why. So other things I've seen is in the military, so with the assault boots, really solid boots. So if you think about like hiking boots, you almost get folds at the ankle line. So that's where people were getting tendinopathies at the front of their ankle. So basically every time they lifted their foot up, it hurt. And it was actually because where the leather folded was rubbing on that tendon, which annoyed it. So a bit more like a blister in itself. But until we changed the footwear, well, it wouldn't go away. Things like when we talk about thumb tendons, so it can happen at the top of your thumb, it's having a look at things like your deadlift straps. If you're holding in a way that's causing that irritation, sometimes it's not the thumb moving, it's actually because it's getting blistered by something else. Okay, so just think, if things are changed, what have I changed? So especially feet, changing footwear, especially feet being your only contact with the floor, I'd always have a look. If you change a style of shoe, if you change from like a seated job to a standing job, that's a very big difference in loading to those tendons. So they're the things that I'll look at or I'll question. Pain relief, I'm not a big fan, so we can use it if you're struggling to get by or do day-to-day things because it hurts, fine. But that is not the fix. Back to my blister on my foot, I can take all the ibuprofen I want, but until I take my shoe off, it's not going away. So tendons, it can help, but we need to treat the fire, not just the smoke, which is that it hurts. Any questions? Stunned you. So this is when I quantify training load. So in some sports, it's not very relevant. It can be relevant. Things like triathlon, people that are in endurance sports, that is probably where it has a better place. So in netball, it's got a high demand where there's lots of games and trainings and a lot of juggling. So this is something that anyone can use, but if you're in strength where you're almost very much followed by clubby and kind of 4 or 5 training sessions a week, it probably doesn't have its place. It might just be an extra bit of work. If you're having issues with tendon problems, then it might have its place. So this is Excel. I like Excel. So what you would do, you would write what kind of session. So on a Monday, I'm just making up these numbers and I don't just train 3 times a week. On Monday, I do my overhead session. It takes me an hour overall for when I walked in the gym and started warm up to the time I'm walking out having cooled down. And then rate out of 10, that rated perceived exertion, perceived exertion out of 10. So 0, no effort whatsoever. 10, I almost died, couldn't carry on. It was that extreme. You do time versus the time it took multiplied by the RPE. So 300 units of load. That means nothing on its own. Each day, so I went for a longer hill walk with my dog. So 45 minutes, pretty easy. So that's why it's 90 units of load, but it's still a stimulus on my body. Then I had my deadlift session. So that took a bit longer because I had more rest period, but I still include that. And that was, Chloe made me do a max. So therefore it's an 8, 1200 units. So at the end of the week, I've accumulated 1,590 units of load. Doesn't really mean much at the minute. Next week, I had a deadline at work. So Monday morning, I had to do a presentation. I didn't sleep very well because of it. And then I had a fight with my partner. So actually, my overhead session, even though I pretty much did the same, just felt a bit harder. Just, those reps just weren't quite as buttery smooth. I then decided to go for a run because I'm going to clear my head. 30-minute run, but I pushed it because I thought if I run faster, it will clear my head. Deadlifts felt awful this week. So somehow, even though my program hasn't changed that much except for my run, I've now got 1,800 units of load. So that's a 12% difference from last week. So that's where now this roller coaster, we've just gone on a much bigger uphill spike. Ideally, we don't want to do more or less than 5%. So your perceived exertion can change that. So if you know that on Wednesday, so I've got an exam on Wednesday. So I might need to, that session that night, reduce the weight a little bit because I know I'm going to be a bit more mentally fatigued. It might be, if you know you're trying a new skill, something else might have to come down. So my run, I should have gone at an easier pace, for example, to make sure that I don't do this spike and load. So I would put everything in here, even hill walking with your families, going around the Christmas markets, that's all stimulus on the body. Doing things like yoga, that is still stimulus. Yes, it's a lower amount. It's not going to be as hard as your deadlift max, but it's still a stimulus. So this is just more if you look back at the presentation. So what a loader, that how we work it out. So that is a unit of load. So the number means nothing on its own. It's that accumulation week on week. Now, Chloe and I might do the exact same program, but our numbers would never be the same because what Chloe might think is an 8, I might think is a 10. Okay, so it doesn't matter what your mate is doing. It's always about you in that moment in time. So that's why it's really important to write down kind of your feedback at the time, because afterwards you might have been like, oh, it wasn't that bad. But actually at the time you thought it was the end of the world kind of session. But yes, sometimes we can feel dramatic, but I'd always put that down because that's how your body felt at that moment in time. So you need to invest in yourself. I said to Chloe, I feel a bit like Tony Robbins now, but when we regularly train, we increase how much we can tolerate. So now energy is currency. And I've gone for the Americans today. Energy is now dollar bills. So if you spend too much energy, so you're doing extra runs, you're doing extra time in the gym, I'm going to go harder, faster. Yeah, you're going to be getting rid of those dollar bills. And your debt collector, which is your injuries and illness, will come and collect. You need to invest in yourself. So you're putting a lot of stress on your body, and that's how we get better. Stress is not always a bad thing. That is just how we adapt. But we do need to look at recovery. So the recovery wheel, which we've gone through before, is how you put some more money back in the bank. So making sure you are fueling yourself. That is how you're going to allow your body to make those adaptations. Appreciate there's a whole different talk all about this, but that is money in, the money out. My safety police spiel. So as I said, I've always got to talk about risk. So when we're talking about tendons, if you're training, yes, sometimes you get the pain, but if you have a sudden pop, pain, loss of function, so unfortunately we've seen recently in strongwoman a ruptured bicep, it is very almost clear. It's not just a, did it pop? No, you know. Straight to A&E. So even things like Achilles, you don't wait for the physio, you go to A&E because it does need quite quick management. If it's like, oh, it kind of built up and now it's sore, but I can still bend and move my arm, there's no sign of deformity, so it's not bicep up near your ear, Achilles where you can't actually point your foot, that is unlikely going to be a rupture. And yes, always seek help, but that's where if it pops, A&E job. And that is it. So that was just that this time last week. This was my holiday when I was resting, and I'm on reload now. Any questions? So I'm going to stop sharing.
I have a question. You're showing the math bit where the work that you do the day, the RPE times the minutes and stuff. So and then you went into currency, like exercise is currency. Is there so say at the end of the week, you're like, oh, wait a minute, wow, I'm at 12%, which is the example you have. Can you get to do some of the activities on the recovery wheel to help abate some of that? If you realize as you're going down the week that you're doing more, or is that just not helpful?
Yeah. So ideally, we don't want to be doing that 12% difference. Yes, if you end up overloading, your recovery is really important, but you're not going to be able to do 12% increases every week and just do a little bit more of having an extra meal, doing a little bit of extra reflection. That's not what's going to stop it. It'll help if you've identified, I've just had a really stressful week and that's why I've spiked. By going up more than 5%, that doesn't mean I am going to get an injury. It just means that there's a risk. But that's where we notice, so especially like when like I said, if we've got an injury, that could influence that we're not going to make an injury better. Or if I've got an athlete that's just had a big injury, so say had surgery, anything like that, that's how we make sure we return to play safely to reduce something else being a problem. So that, yes, if you notice a spike, that recovery wheel, getting that currency in is important, but we're not encouraging that you carry on these 12% increases.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
So you mentioned that when you're having a tendon issue, that tendon is taking on extra water.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that anti-inflammatories don't really do anything for that except take away the pain. Is there a better, like, what does the work of like getting the water out of that tendon? Is it stretching the muscle around it or something else, just time?
It's offloading. So that's where the reason it's being stressed. So what am I going to do? My Achilles tendon, so on my heel, is getting stressed because I'm doing loads of walking because I don't know, there's a different event and I'm doing more walking than normal. So I can take pain relief. Yes, it'll help with the pain. But if I carry on walking, that tendon is still being overstimulated. So I either have to offload, so reduce what I'm doing. It will be that because I'm doing more, my muscle's getting tighter because it can't handle it. As I said, any muscle that's weak or isn't used to something, they get tight. That's every body's reaction. So we have to find a way to offload. So unfortunately, it's not just one answer of pain relief is okay, but yeah, you have to loosen the muscles. Like, it's not always easy just to stop. Like, say, okay, don't be on your feet, lie down now, even though you've got life to carry on with. What can we do to reduce it?
Gotcha.
I'm going to shut the door quickly. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Karen?
Yeah, it does.
I said tendons take a while to come on. So when I have people come to me with their shoulder problem, Achilles problems, they're like, oh, I've noticed it the last 3 months, it's kind of built up. I will ask them what's happened 3 months prior to it starting. So generally there'll be a pattern. So I had a table tennis player today who had outside hip pain. So he said, it's been on for 2 weeks. Every time I lunge to the side, table tennis style, I get pain, but I'm fine day to day. It gets worse in training, painful that night, but fine by the morning. So I said, what is different? So have you increased how much you train? Are you doing anything different in the gym? Is anything happening? Are you doing like exams at the minute because it's uni time? No. Have you changed your technique? Are you working on something new? Yeah, 4 weeks ago, my coach told me to do this with a little bit of a twist. Well, we're not used to that new style of training. So for him, he had to work more on that recovery. Things were getting tighter because he wasn't used to working that way. So sometimes that's where that investigation comes in, looking 3 steps back. Have I changed? Has my job role changed? Has my training block changed? So sometimes that's where, we go in off season and do a different skill that we haven't worked on in a while. It could be going back to lifting stones. We haven't done it in ages. And that's probably where more people do get bicep issues. It could be grip work. So you're used to doing kind of speed farmers, but now we're being told to do max holds, which are your tendons used to holding something for 30 seconds when normally a farmer's event is, say, 14. So it's factoring in those little things, looking at the bigger picture. Sorry, I go really strong, man, plus table tennis. So any one of our endurance runners out there, if you change your terrain, if you change your footwear, if you change how often, so because my work patterns change, instead of doing Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm now doing back-to-back days. So your recovery time is less. So that might influence as well. Or I've started doing my leg session before running because of time, but then my recovery is not as good after that. Therefore, it's affecting my run. So it's thinking about that planning side of it as well. Any other questions?
I think you said this near the beginning, but can it be just a tight muscle that cause, like, because I feel like I get some sort of tendon issue at the front of my shoulder, doing cleans especially, and I think it's probably because sitting at a desk, like my shoulders get a bit rounded, and then if everything in there gets all like, is that a thing? Like the
that is a
tendon
very
will
common
get
thing.
like squashed. Almost.
Exactly that, and that's exactly how I call it. A tendon gets squished. So can we all see? So shoulder is a ball and socket. That's my collarbone. That is my arm. We have our rotator cuff muscles that go round the side. Now, if we sit with our hands forward, our shoulders have lots of space. If we hunch over like so, so you can see my hunchiness. If we're like this, the tendon is in a more squished position. If I go like this, if I put my hands behind my back, I put it in a more squished position. Now, if my tendon is angry, it's filled with water, like a blister. So if I lift my arm up, it tries to tuck under, but because it's a little bit more inflamed, it will get squished on the way. So most people say it hurts when I do this. So if you're cleaning and doing this, and it's a little bit angry, and most people say to me, my pain hurts here, it hurts to do my hair, it hurts to lie on it, and it's because that blister is getting angry. You've hit the nail on the head. We're in a world now where we're more desk-based, we're driving, we're more anteriorly dominant in our chest. You know, the fetal position is actually this. So our body actually is more inclined to be tighter in our chest. We've evolved to stand up, and we're devolving back this way. So we actually have to work almost 2 times more back, like pull to push, to counter it. So when you're clean, it might not be the clean that's the issue. That's where I would say doing a little bit more pull-based work alongside to counter that. We're in a world where pecs do get tighter, and that's where these things get annoyed. So a really common thing. So it's impingement syndrome, but I don't like that word too much. Things just get a little bit angry in there. But I always say it's like a blister until you offload it. If you keep annoying it, and that, like, other things I always say is, like, if you're going to lift your arms up, try go thumbs up. Let's say positive. If thumbs are down, put your hand on your shoulder. If you put your thumb down, it's in a more squished position. If you put your thumb up, it's a little bit more space. The longer the lever, the harder it is. So that's always going to put, if an angry tendon is there, the longer the lever and the weight, the more painful it's going to be. So bring the weight closer. It's always going to be easier on your shoulder while you're in pain. So that's how we offload it. So I see it a lot that, like, oh, the kettle's always a big culprit. It really hurts when I pour the kettle. It's because I've suddenly got a big weight at the end of my arm and I'm turning it downwards. So putting that blister and poking it the biggest way I can.
So the main things then to unsquish would be to strengthen like behind and then stretch out.
Yep, stretch your chest.
Yeah.
Shoulders into your back pocket. So kind of that shoulder retraction. So that's normally quite a good like warm up exercise. So the ability to pull back and down. So yeah, shoulders into your back pockets. The stronger we can be here, the less we're going to get over dominated. You can go into these positions. So a clean will be a little bit more biased at the front. But if something's already aggravated from day to day, tendons, they do get annoyed in sport, but look at the bigger picture. So say with knee, especially lower limb, you're walking about all day, you're, you know, getting on and off a chair, you're doing stairs, that is all stimulus. It's not just your one squat workout. Shoulders, if you're lifting your kids, doing XYZ, that's still stimulus, but we blame it on the gym. That's just the final straw normally. There we go. Oh, you just put yourself in it now, Sophie. But yeah, so that is where, if in doubt, think shoulders into your back pocket. So a lot of people like desk-based world, like having a look at your desk setup. I know we all do this like DSC assessment, but now we're working from home. How many people sit on the sofa and like chill backwards? We want to be at eye height, so we're not down here. We don't want to be putting our arms across our desk because that brings us forward. We don't want our desk too high where we're sitting like so. So it's little things like that. Sitting there for 10 minutes isn't the problem. Accumulating 40 hours in the week, that's where the problem comes about. Put me on a shoulder rant now, but
I wonder if that's like the same with driving though.
Exactly the same.
I've noticed some people, I'm going to call Gabby out. She just like,
I thought you were going to be like some people.
you know, and leans forward,
forward,
locks arms, you know. So
anything where you're almost like, I'm not saying Gabby's a boy racer now, but going like this. You want to think shoulders back and down, and especially in like bucket seat cars, they're big culprits. If you're a little bit taller than the average and you're actually hunching over, our body doesn't like sustained positions. Our head is the heaviest part of our body. So anything where we start to move forward, something else has to work harder to compensate. So neck bone's connected to the shoulder region, as the song goes. So that's where it all does connect. You're going to give her a talking to now.
yeah, actually.
Sorry, Karen.
No, you're good. So what can you do when, like for your sport, you need to be in that kind of forward position? Like say for a stone load, you've got a very, very rounded back. For some of the stuff I do on aerials, you're bent over and inverted and that kind of stuff. So you're doing it with a rounded back. How do you prevent tendon issues as a result of kind of being in that position? What can you do to counteract it?
So there's nothing you can't do. So we'll put it out there. It's just we need to load it gradually. So we're not going to go straight to, with a stone, we're not going to go straight to the heaviest PB stone. You start on a lighter stone and you build up the volume. So back to with my capacity, you do this. And that's how we protect it, is because we gradually build up the exposure to each, you know, be it on the area, be it on the stone. It's okay to do all these movements. If we start getting pain, like I said earlier, like you bring it up with Chloe, you say, all right, with myself, and say, when I do stones, I now get pain when I start lifting the 100, but I didn't last week on the 80, for example, or I was okay until rep 10, or in the EMOM, I was fine on an EMOM, but as soon as you made it threes, that's where I got pain. So that's probably where it's more likely going to happen. Things like aerial, going to certain positions, you don't want to invert with your whole body weight first. You start off with like banded movements or easier movements. So does that exactly answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess the root of my question is there some special prehab kind of thing that needs to be done? But it sounds like the more important thing is just kind of working up slowly and being intentional and gradual.
So if again, probably the shoulder one's a little bit easier. Like if the reason it's flaring, like the front of the shoulder, because something else is weaker. So as physio is just strengthen and lengthen. I wish I had a more fancy job, but I don't. You just strengthen it or you lengthen it. So shoulders, you lengthen the front, you strengthen the back. If it's like lower limb, my right leg's the problem, but my left leg is weaker, I have to strengthen one side and lengthen the other one. So if there's pain on a movement, and it's not just technique related, it's then having a look at what is not as strong, therefore something is compensating. So as I said, graded exposure, but then if pain is still persisting, having a look at the loading that you've done, and that will be where kind of Chloe comes in. And then also having a look at alternate muscles. Is it that something else needs to be playing more because it's not doing enough of its workload? Tendons, like I said, is not as simple as the bicep ruptured, that's it. It's generally such a bigger picture because it's an overuse and there are so many confounding factors to it. So I'm going to give you politician answers probably. Any other questions?
I think you smashed it, Leslie. That was so good. I found it really, really helpful. So hopefully everyone else has too.
So it's already up on the app.
Yeah, presentation is up. I'll stop recording this now. Where is it? But there we go. I will get this uploaded over the weekend to